Welcome to the Unstuck and Unstoppable podcast, where we help you move your life forward. If you've ever felt lost, maybe you don't know who you are, or feel like you're losing yourself, you just don't have a good sense of your identity, you are listening to the right episode of our podcast today. My name's Jim Kyles. I'm your host, and I'm here with Jolea Garza.
Yes, this is such a great topic.
Yes.
Uncovering your identity, discovering your identity.
So excited about it. And, I said you're listening to the podcast. We've got a lot of people watching the podcast as well.
It's great.
So great to have our visual camera.
Yeah.
We got Kevin back over there running camera. We're so glad
Making
to have
it
you.
happen.
Making it happen.
Yeah.
We got our new set today. So
yeah,
come on.
I'm loving it.
Super pumped. Got a good corner in my office.
1% better. I think that's what
right.
we said. We said it in podcasts before, but it's just 1% better.
We love your
It's been
feedback.
great.
So many of you guys are giving such great feedback, and we're just thrilled to be on this journey with you. Today, I'm really excited about the episode.
Yeah.
We're talking about identity and piggybacking on the conversation we had last week.
Yeah.
When we talked about the 5 regrets.
I thought that was so good. Truthfully, after that conversation, I was like, I have to just put these on my wall. I feel like the entire time we were talking, I was man, I could almost struggle with this regret and all of these. If you didn't listen to that podcast, go back and listen to it. The 5 regrets of life, the things that people said they would regret or did regret on their deathbed. It's such a big deal.
Yeah, and I read about it in the book, and really today and over the next couple of weeks, about 4 or 5 weeks, we're going to be talking about the 4 essential building blocks of life.
Yeah, and these will help you avoid.
These are going to help you avoid those regrets.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's chapter 7 through 11 of the book, and really the premise is that there are some building blocks of life that we have to work on, focus on, develop if we're going to get to the end of our life having finished the race well.
That's great.
As a believer, I want to get into heaven and eternity and hear Jesus say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." For those that maybe you're not a believer, you're not a Christian, you don't have to be to listen to the podcast. You want to get to the end of your life and say, "Man, I lived a life well lived.
Yeah.
I fulfilled my purpose. I did everything that was within me."
Yeah.
And today is really going to help you on that journey.
Absolutely.
And so we're super pumped. Now the book is coming out. Maybe by the time you listen to it, it's already out. But November 8th.
November 8th. We're right around the corner.
Yay. It's called Unstuck and Unstoppable. And if you haven't already, I want to encourage you, go to the website, jimkyles.com.
Yep.
You can pre-order your
the book.
copy right now. And we would love to put that in your hands whenever it launches out November 8th. A lot of people ask if there's going to be the audible version. Of course.
Yes,
of
there
course.
is.
I'm an Audible guy. I love to listen to books. And then if they're good, I'll go back and read it.
Yeah, that's great.
And so that version will be out as well. But today we're talking about identity. I believe there's a crisis of identity.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's amazing, having gone through this global pandemic, people thought, and I've heard this from a ton of people, it's really how we began the journey, or I began the journey of writing the book. Never intended to write a book.
Right.
I'm a pastor of a local church, and I remember coming through this pandemic that I just felt like I had to help people get unstuck. And then there was even a point where I was stuck, and not like I never get stuck, but I'm like, I'm the visionary leader and pastor. I'm not supposed to be stuck. And I think it was July. I was having a good old-fashioned pity party.
Oh, I love it. Those are my favorite. Used to be my favorite.
Complaining to God.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
And the whole theme for the book came up. It was Acts chapter 27, 28, reading about Paul in my one-year Bible, and he got shipwrecked on the island of Malta. And his Acts 28:10, there's a passage, and it simply says this. And this started the whole journey. It says, and when they were ready, they set sail.
That's great.
And what that just spoke to me was that even in the midst of being stuck is not being without movement or motion. It's not just sitting passively by hoping someone's going to help you. It's not being a victim. Paul was doing the work of God.
Right.
And then when the season that God had for him to move forward in came, then God opened up the door for provision to happen and for him to get off the island and no longer be shipwrecked.
That's great.
And I think sometimes we believe the lie that I'm stuck And it's not just stuck. We begin to believe the lie, I'm stranded.
Yep.
Stranded is without hope.
Yep.
And I want you to know, if you're listening right now and you feel stuck, or maybe you feel stranded without hope, there is hope. And there are some things that this podcast and even today is going to help you. One of the primary ways that we get stuck is we lose our identity.
Yeah. I would almost even challenge that and say, maybe it's not even that you lose your identity. Maybe you never even tried uncovering your identity.
So,
yeah. So many people, I think, use the phrase identity crisis, and we live our entire lives in an identity crisis because we're constantly looking for, well, who am I and who am I? But then we find things that maybe fulfill that for a little bit. Oh, well, I'm really good at playing tennis. And so now I'm just a tennis player. And yet we use that for a little bit until we're bad at tennis or we break an ankle, and then we're back to a new identity crisis, and we're looking to find out who we are our entire lives.
It's because, and I write about it in the book, and we're even going to talk about it today, people find their identity in what they do and never fully discover their identity of who they really are.
Right.
And your identity is who you are apart from what you do or what you have accomplished. And when you discover who you are, your who impacts your what.
So good.
It impacts everything else. But if you've never discovered who you really are, well, then your identity is, well, I'm a school teacher. Right. Well, what happens when you're no longer a school teacher?
Yeah.
Maybe you're a lawyer. What happens when you're no longer a lawyer? This is what we see a lot of times, especially with people as they get into the older ages of life. Their identity was in their career. Right. And it's like, well, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not a firefighter anymore. Right. I'm not a successful businessman. So they feel lost.
Right. It's like
or
you
a
get
mother.
to the end of your life and you feel like,
absolutely.
What did I do everything for?
Well, and we find this in my wife. We got 4 kids. You find it as a mom.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm a mom, and this is my identity's in my kids, and it's house. So if your kids are doing well, you feel like a great,
you're successful, life is
awesome
good.
mom.
Yeah. And then when your kids aren't doing well, you're like, I am a failure, and the whole world is coming crashing down. Yeah.
Well, and you start to live a roller coaster life, right? Because it's like when you're doing good, you feel good, your identity is good. When you're doing bad. And the thing that I even write about in the book, and I know I reference it quite a bit, but I talk about my experience as an entrepreneur. I didn't realize that at a young age, what God would bring me through would shape my whole future. I was a young 20-something-year-old entrepreneur. We had a restaurant, real estate. Lots of things were going well. I was newly married, beautiful wife. People always said we're like Ken and Barbie. I mean, we just had all the things were going for us. Well, then all of a sudden, everything came to a screeching halt. A business deal went bad.
Wow.
The landlord of a restaurant that I owned did some shady things. I didn't do anything wrong. I lost the restaurant. All the homes were in foreclosure. Thank God we didn't lose them. We ended up selling. But what I found was then in that moment, my mom sent me off to a weekend retreat and said, son, you're depressed. You've got to go. I want you to go to this boot camp, and I want you to allow God to really speak to you in this season. And, I was kicking and screaming. My twin brother ended up going with me. And the most amazing thing happened in this boot camp when I'm having my pity party, when I'm at the lowest point, because you got to remember, I was a young 20-something, successful. And then my world just came, one day everything just came crashing down. Yeah. And I was living for God and doing everything right. And I'm like bitter, angry, mad. And in this boot camp retreat, the thing that radically changed my life was by the end of the retreat, I discovered my identity. Wow. Facilitators brought us to say, hey, we're going to do a treasure hunt. And I'm like, cool, let's do a treasure hunt. And they said, we're going to discover who we really are. I'm like, I know who I am. I'm an entrepreneur. Yeah. And they said, well, get out by yourselves. We're going to answer the simple question. And here's the question. And it's so simple yet so complex. The question is, who am I? Yeah. That's it. That was the only question.
That's it. Yeah.
And I was so mad and frustrated. I'm like, well, I know who I am. And the lady said, the facilitator was walking around. She's like, well, who are you? Well, I'm a failure. The restaurant's out of this, or I'm an entrepreneur. She said, no, Jim, those are the things that you do. That's not who you are. And I'm like, so now I'm just frustrated. So I'm like, well, who am I? I'm lost. Wow. And she just said, well, here's what I would challenge you with, Jim. She said, God is the one that gives us our identity. He's the one who reveals to us how he made us. Why don't you just pray a prayer to God and ask him, God, would you show me who am I? And then revisit those questions.
That's great.
And see if God won't reveal to you who he says you are, apart from what you do. And I did just that. And the most amazing thing, there were 7 sentences, and I'm not going to say them now. You've heard them.
Yeah.
And I share them. They're up on my wall. I wrote them on my wall, and they've gone with for almost 20 years. And what I found was those 7 sentences solidified who I was regardless of what I did.
And what season you're in.
Regardless of the season. And here's what I found too, is that my identity, discovering my identity, was the most powerful thing I've ever done, but it didn't immediately change my circumstances.
Right.
It's not like I discovered my identity and
like,
everything's good. No.
This is why you're watching the YouTube video right now.
You saw the
It wasn't that moment.
No, that's right. And but what did happen was, though the circumstances didn't change, I had changed.
That's great.
So the crushing pressure, the crushing weight, the debilitating depression and stress and anxiety, it almost just peeled back.
Right.
And I realized I know who I am, and who I am will now affect and impact everything that I do.
Great.
And from that moment on, it took years it took me, I tell the church, it took us 10 years to get out of. We didn't file bankruptcy, but it took me 10 years to pay everything back. I mean, it wasn't a slow process, but it shaped and formed who I am today.
Yep.
And then what I realized coming out of this global pandemic, God used that as part of the foundation for the book.
Well, what I'm hearing is that it got you off of the roller coaster.
Yes.
Because we talked about this maybe last week, but it's just, life is full of ups and downs. There are always going to be hard moments in your life, but it's how do I get off of the roller coaster and knowing who you are,
get you off of
detached from what you do and what season of your life you're in and how old you are and where you live and what you have will really help you continue to move forward, take steps, regardless of what it looks like.
Yeah. And then when you're in the lowest of low points places where people don't value you, you don't get offended at them. They don't know me.
Yeah.
I know who I am.
Yeah. God defines me. That's good enough.
Well, and that's the one thing, if you're listening, I want you to write this down. People define you by how they meet you, but God defines you by how he made you.
So good.
So let me explain. So if someone had met me at the peak of the success of the restaurant, which we were voted Reader's Choice Award for best service.
Right.
I mean, we were blowing up. We had lines out the door. This is at the peak of our business when the landlord shut us down.
Wow.
And you would have met me back then and said, wow, Jim, you're a young, successful entrepreneur. Man, it's amazing. Look, you got 30 some odd, staff, and you're blowing up. You can't even So they just say you're successful, you're smart, you're, all the definitive words that they would say and define you by. But then if you'd have met me after the restaurant shut down, you'd be like, wow.
Yeah, you messed up.
Wow, you're kind of like a failure.
Yeah,
like what? Here's what, man. What did you do to mess that up? Like you had so many people out the door. You were making so much money. What? Wow. What kind of secret stuff are you shady
what are you dealing
in?
with? And I think that's such a huge phrase, because I think that's why we live in an identity crisis, because we're constantly gleaning off of what people have said about
validating
us from the very beginning. Like if your parents were like, hey, I'm raising a football player, everything about you was, well, I'm just going to be a football player. I'm a great football player, and that's what I am. And so even growing up, this is why I was laughing at the beginning of this, because identity and uncovering who you are outside of what you do is just such a journey and such a freeing journey at that.
Right.
But I think about, in my early 20s, when I was beginning to get into the workforce, I'm very organized, but people would say, hey, you have a gift of administration and you're such a great administrator and I want you to administrate. And it's funny because I actually worked for your twin brother.
Yeah, you did.
Administrating
5 years.
And it's really funny because the truth is, I don't like administrating at all. And so I was gifted at it. And for 5 years, I spent my time saying, I'm just a great administrator and that's what I am and that's who I am. And when I started to not be that great because it wasn't who God made me to be, it didn't make me come alive, then that redefined, well, then I'm not really good at my job and I'm not really good at, who I am. And then again, it was who am I?
Yes.
Because I attached what people said I was to what I did.
That was your identity.
Yeah, to my identity.
Well, and I think it's okay to do something for a season that's not necessarily your identity, but what you have to be careful of is that their labels don't become your identity.
Right. And that's
exactly what, because if you don't know who you are, and that's what happens, people label you, and those labels, you start to live a false life because you're living up to the label.
And they're not even
they're not
bad.
malicious.
Well,
they may be.
Sometimes,
you're a failure.
Yeah.
You're just like your mom.
Right.
You're just like you're uneducated.
Yeah.
You'll never amount to anything. So they can be negative, but they don't have to be negative.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to prevent is getting to the end of our life saying, I lived for what others expected instead of for what God created.
Yeah.
And that's where the identity portion is so important. I love the passage, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. It says, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do.
That's great.
That you are God's handiwork. Every one of you are uniquely and intimately created and fashioned and formed.
Yeah.
I love what he says to the prophet Jeremiah. He said, before you were born, I knew you.
Yeah.
I fashioned you in your mother's womb.
Yeah, I love even the use of the word handiwork. Or fashion, because it means that it's unique. You know, it's not, hey, you're a carbon copy of every other person in this world, but you were hand created. And so there is a uniqueness and a special many special pieces of who you are that God has created and planted on the inside of you.
Yeah, so discovering your identity, it's really the foundational piece to becoming unstoppable. Because here's the whole key, and what the podcast, the book is really all about. It's not just about getting you unstuck. That's just part of it. So I think that's even the easiest part, because to get unstuck, all I got to do is take one step.
Right, exactly. Just keep moving.
And that's really the phrase for our podcast is helping you take one step forward.
Right.
Getting you unstuck's not so hard. What's hard, in my opinion, is doing the work to helping you become unstoppable.
Right.
Because that is the essence of a person who will live a life well lived. That's what you see through the Apostle Paul. And I go back just to referencing biblical characters. The whole journey and the study and the research for the book, even with the Apostle Paul, everything that he went through, unbelievable. Like the troubles, he's shipwrecked, he's beaten, he's stoned to death.
If I had gone through the things Paul had gone through, every time I read it, I'm like, I have no complaints. Like, there's nothing valid that I could go
Houston
through.
traffic, you know?
Right. Like getting bitten by a snake, being shipwrecked. And he's like, I press on towards the goal.
I press on. And this is where what made him unstoppable was not only it's not just knowing his identity, he knew his identity in Christ.
Yes, yeah.
And I cannot understate that. If you're not a believer, you don't have to agree with me, but we believe that God is an intelligent designer who designed us, hand-fashioned us, formed us. So you can't discover your identity apart from God. You discover your identity in God.
That's great.
And as you do that, and I didn't even know what I was doing 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I know what God is doing now. It's all hindsight is 2020.
Right.
But it made me unstoppable. It was like no matter what the enemy brought, I ended up losing the business. I ended up working 3 jobs. I've been in jobs I love. I've been in jobs I've hated. I've been in jobs where people believe in me, people don't. And people said, how do you keep going? And I think the foundation is I know who I am, and I have a gift for not quitting
that's
and
great.
Discovering the hard work of who am I. And so really it's the foundation. The second thing that identity does, and there's more, we actually have a worksheet that I'll lead you to at the end of the podcast. You can go right now, jimkyles.com. I'm going to help walk you through. It's a worksheet to help you start the process to discover your identity. But identity, and you can write this down if you're at a place to write it down, it establishes your real value.
That's great.
It establishes it. See, it doesn't change your value. It establishes it for me.
Right.
Like God already has assigned the value of your life.
Great.
But so many people are walking around and don't understand the true value of who they are.
Well, and the validation.
Yep.
So when you know who you are, and when your value is established in God and in who God has created you to be, you don't need other people to tell you, man, you're doing a good job.
Right.
And the constant validation, and hey, you're on the right track. It's like, no, I know who I am, and I'm going to continue to move forward because this is who God has made me to be. Whether everybody agrees with me or doesn't, whether everybody's excited about what I'm doing or not, I know who I am, and that's how I can move forward.
Well, and when you have your identity established, I want you to listen. If you hear this, you will never be too good for any job that you need to work.
That's great.
See, when you don't know who you are, and I have people say, well, I'm too good to work that job. Like, they don't pay me enough. And I'm not telling you to allow people to devalue you. But I do know that there are moments you got to take some stepping stones.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes you got to start at the bottom to get your way to the top. Or whatever the bottom is. It's like we've all had to work in a season where something we didn't love, we didn't like. And when you know your identity, you don't compromise your identity. You just say, God, is this what I'm supposed to do? It doesn't feel like what I'm supposed to do. I think I'm better than that. But if you hear God say yes, I'm not afraid of that.
Right.
Man, I remember even in my ministry career, when we started pastoring here in Houston for a church that brought us on, I'd left a ministry up in Tyler. I was what they called the executive pastor. Well, my gift is administration. I'm a lot like you. We're both threes. We're very administrative. Not organized, but I'm administrative, if that makes any sense at all.
That's funny.
And they brought me in, and what I didn't realize, and I should have, I think I did, I was really the only employee they had. And we had a 50,000 square foot building. So I was the janitor.
Come on.
I was the youth pastor. I was the administrator. I was all things to all people. And I remember someone said, I can't believe you're in there cleaning the restrooms and mopping the floors. And I thought, part of my identity statement, I'll just tell you the first few phrases, I am a general. And it's like, okay, I'm a general mopping floors.
Whether I'm
a general doing youth group. It don't matter what. It's great. Like that is what God has called me to do. So then what happened was I'm going to mop this floor like a general. I'm going to lead these students like a general. And then what happens is your identity's been established. And so I'm not afraid to take a job that could seem underneath me or that would devalue. Nobody can devalue you when you know who you truly are. That's exactly right.
So good.
And you have to be willing to say, God, just like David played skillfully in the field. In fact, the prophet Samuel found him in the field.
Yep.
Imagine if David said, no, I'm too good for this. I need to be in the palace.
Right. He would have missed his opportunity. Yep.
But he wasn't. He's like, no. There was a security in him. And even after David was anointed, what's so fascinating is that all the big things that happened in his life happened because he was still in the field. Jesse sends him to go on an errand to his brothers while he's in the field. The king's servant mentions him to the king about playing the harp in the palace because he saw David in the field.
So good.
Yeah, and I just cannot understate the fact that sometimes you got to be in the field. And if you don't know your true value and your identity, you will look for the position that will send you down the wrong path instead of just saying, God, maybe this is the field that I need to be in for now as you prepare me for the palace.
Right. And I love, you always say people will get to the end of their lives realizing that they had their ladder leaned up against the wrong. And
made it to the top of the ladder.
I mean? And so you're climbing the top of the ladder, you're getting all the validation and you're climbing. It looks good.
You might even be making big money.
Yeah, it looks great until you get to the top and you realize that you're unfulfilled.
It's not who you really were created to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and don't allow titles or money to validate that you're in the right position.
That's great.
Because I got people that I know make a lot of money, but they're miserable because they realize this is the easy way out. And so knowing it establishes your value and just allows you to be able to do whatever God wants you to do. Hey, so excited now. Of course, there's way more content than we could ever talk about.
Yeah.
What we want to do is just foster the conversation, have you thinking about, hey, identity. Do I really know who I am? Answer the question, who am I? And then just start to write it out. And what you'll find so easily comes out is it's not who you are, it's what you do.
Yep. I was just going to say that. Yeah. And so as you're doing that, just write it all out, I think would be my suggestion. And then you're going to have to go back multiple times and edit it. I actually remember when we did this in the workshop that you hosted doing Unstuck and Unstoppable. Yep. And so it was so funny, but you would make us read our identity statements out loud and you say, stop, that's what you do. That's not who you
That's
are.
not who you are.
And then we would go back and we'd edit and we'd remove, and really until we could just say things about who we are and not just what we do, it's a constant process.
Yes.
So
well, and it takes work. It is a process. Yeah. And go to jimkyles.com. I actually have a worksheet. It's practical steps to help you discover your identity.
It's great.
And I'm going to walk you through it. We've got, again, Jolea wants to be a resource to help you on this journey. And so there'd be nothing greater than for you to discover your identity. Here's what I would ask, just as you're doing this, as God is sharing this with you and you're discovering it, send it to us. Yeah. The email's in the show notes. We want to hear from you. Yeah. Tell us what God is doing and speaking into your life, and we'd love to be on this journey with you. Hey, also, there's a couple of things we want to do to help you move your life forward. Would you subscribe to the podcast?
Every time you subscribe, you get notified when a new podcast drops.
Yeah, wherever you consume the content, subscribe. You'll get it automatically.
Yeah, we want you to teach it. So we want you to share what you learned on this podcast with somebody. Maybe it's with your kids on your drive home. What a great tool to teach your kids. Yeah. Or with a family member or a spouse or a friend.
Oh, absolutely. And then engage. We've got a great online community of Facebook. If you're watching this right now on YouTube, just click on the link, takes you to the Facebook page. If you're listening, just click on the link again. Get involved with the community. We'd love to hear your story, get to know you personally. Jolea and I are on there.
Absolutely.
It'd be great to meet you.
Yeah, post a review. We want to hear from you. We love hearing your feedback. We love hearing how this podcast is impacting your life.
And then share the podcast with someone. I always just say find one person that you think would benefit from today's podcast and share it with them, and be the one that helps them get unstuck and become unstoppable. Well, we're so thrilled to be with you. Next week, we're going to be talking about discovering your purpose.
Yes.
And so I'm excited. And then I think we're going to throw in a bonus episode.
Coming up,
Yeah, so you and I and Phyllis recorded something. And so you guys be looking for that. My wife and I, Jolea, interviewed us about relationships. And so you guys will get to check out our bonus episode. So we love you guys. Can't wait to be back with you next week. Bye-bye.